All right, next step in the process, we're one more step closer to getting this roof on. What we're going to be doing in this segment is showing you how to install outriggers. What an outrigger is, essentially it creates an overhang over the gable end of the roof. This is kind of a design issue. Some people like them, some people don't, but in this case we're using them because it's going to add a nice little design element to what we're doing. Essentially what an outrigger is, it's a 2x4 that you nail off into the truss immediately behind the end gable truss. It comes through a notch piece here and it extends out over this gable end. In this case we're going to be doing about a 10-inch overhang because the owner wants about a 12-inch overhang when all is said and done. Now we've got a 10-inch plus 2-inch 2x4 that we're going to put at the end of that for the barge rafter. We space them out, cut a notch using a skill saw, essentially just cut several cuts at about a 1/4 inch or 3/8 of an inch, and then we take our hammer, knock it out, take a reciprocating saw and just clean it up and put the piece in. So the first thing we're going to do is figure out where we're going to put our notches. Typically what you do is you start off at the freeze block, which is down here where the top cord and the bottom cord meet. You can identify that by the big gang nail. Come up a little bit from there and that's where your first notch is going to go. I typically like to go about 24 inches on center, even if it is just a short overhang. In this case, like I said, it's about 10 inches and we could probably get by with 32, maybe even 36. But I prefer better safe than sorry. So we'll mark our first spot. Come over 3.5 inches. Okay, then I come on to the face of this and I mark up 1.5 inches. Obviously I'm going to set the saw for 1.5 inches depth. But what this line will do, it'll give me an idea. Once I'm done cutting my passes, I'll be able to see the line down here and I'll know exactly where I need to be when I'm using the reciprocating saw to kind of clean up this whole notch. Another little trick, if you want to get kind of a roughly a straight line and you want to draw it across, instead of having to line it up and draw like this, just find where you want your line to be, put your pencil there, and then just drag it. It's kind of a cool little trick. Now we'll go from the top, or the ridge, down to the center here. So we have about 8 feet from here to the top of the ridge. So what we're going to do is, instead of going the full 2 feet, I might cut it short a little bit and go 20 inches, 20 inches, 20 inches. That'll end me up right about here where I want to be. Now when you're marking these on center, it's just like marking a 2x4, except instead of a 1.5 inch board you're compensating for on both ends, it's a 3.5 inch board. Remember, you can save a lot of time by using your speed square. Notice I'm not marking crow's foot here and crow's foot there. I'm just using this little ruler inside here to move the speed square up where I need it to be, and then drawing my line directly from that. All right, so we've got all the notches laid out, marked. We know where we need to make our cuts. We're going to get a circular saw, make our cuts, clean them out, and move on to the next step. When we do the actual outrigger, however you want to look at it, whatever you want to call it, we're only going to nail off the back side. We're going to leave the top part until we actually have a chance to look at it and measure off, make sure we have the same distance from the front of the top cord out to the end of the outrigger. So let's get to the next step and start cutting these notches out. All right, so now we're ready to start notching this top cord. Before you even get started, you want to make sure your blade is set to the right depth. So set it to the 2x, maybe just a hair less, because when you take your reciprocating saw to kind of clean out that notch, you're going to lose maybe a 1/16 of an inch to an 1/8 of an inch when you're cleaning it up. And that way you'll have a nice, smooth, plumb, and level surface when you put your outrigger in there. Also, always, even more important than that, or just as important, is your safety. You want to make sure you're in a good position where you're stable and you're able to grab the saw with both hands and make a complete cut all the way through as you continue your cuts every 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. It's always better to move the ladder so you feel safe rather than saying, oh, I can probably work it out without having to get down and then get back up again. I'll save myself a minute or two. But believing that minute or two could cost you a digit, could cost you your life. Just make sure you're being safe at every step of the way, and make sure you're wearing your safety glasses, you've got gloves on, you don't have any clothing that can catch anywhere. Because when you're up at a height, the likelihood for more accidents, just multiplies. Now, if you noticed, I positioned myself one truss away rather than being up real close. I like this because if I can do it, it gives me better leverage. I'm able to sit down on top of the ladder and make a cut across. Now, when I get to the successive cuts that I have to make, I'll have to position myself a little differently, but I'll be able to stand on the top plate. So now that we have all of our cuts made, we'll just take a hammer and just kind of hit it one way, hit it the next, and then off. Now we're just going to clean it up. Now once I get the notch cleaned up, I like to just check my work with a piece of 2x4. And I see it's going to be a perfect fit. Same thing here. So you always want to keep your reciprocating saw at essentially planing it, so you're going to treat it kind of as a plane or a file coming back and forth this way. That way you have it doesn't have to be pretty or have to be actually perfect, but you want to make sure that your 2x4 is going to sit in there nice, actually be snug and not move around a lot, and it's going to be nice and level with the top chord. All right, our notches are all cut. They look nice. We're ready to cut our outrigger boards, nail them in, set them in, and move on to the next step. But before we actually do cut our boards, we need to make sure they're the right length. So we're right at about 24 inches. We need to come out 10 inches to 34. So we have our 10 inches, and then plus the 2 inches plus or minus for the trim and the barge rafter. Barge rafter is essentially the fascia that goes on the gable portion. It's very similar to the fascia that goes at the tails of each truss. So we know it needs to be 34 inches. We'll make our cuts. We've got 10 of these to cut. Okay, so now we have our outriggers cut. They're at the right level. Next thing we want to do is make sure they're lined up correctly. So you can either take your speed square, put it on the inside, bring this thing up and over. We'll make sure it's lined up that way. Then what I like to do is draw a mark here so I know where the board's going to go, where the end of it is, because I want to make sure that this board is square with this truss. We'll pre-nail one nail. Then make sure that it's lined up. Put in a second nail. Make sure it doesn't move. Now, you'll notice I'm not going to nail this one down till we have all of them in. We're able to measure off, make sure we have equal distance from the truss. We might have to move it, adjust this just a little bit to make sure these all look like they're the same distance from the end of the outrigger to the top chord of the end truss. Pre-nail, bring it in a little bit. Set it, make sure it's lined up with the line you just drew and level with the top of the truss. So I think you're getting the idea. We've got 8 more of these to do, so let's just have at it. Okay, now as you're going up and down in between the rafters and between the trusses, you've got a belt on, you're carrying tools. Always be really aware of your surroundings because it's so easy to catch your tool belt on something. It's so easy to catch your tool on something, and you could slip, and every step you take, every move you make, you want to make sure it's safe and it's secure. Like I say, make sure you're totally comfortable in your positioning and kind of play around with it a little bit. Sometimes it might not be perfect, but make sure, most importantly, it's safe. Like I said, I like to hit one end, then another end, kind of like a domino. That way it breaks it without creating too much havoc on the actual top cord. Okay, so we've got all the outriggers or outlookers up, and the next step is we're going to get out, give them a quick eyeball look, make sure they all look okay, come up and measure them, make sure that they're all the same distance or within 1/8 of an inch or so from the top cord of the end trusses. If they are, we're going to take a nail them down so they'll all be set in place, and then we'll be ready for the next step, and that'll be putting up the fascia and the barge rafters. All right, this is just one of those tedious steps. You're going to have to be getting up and down quite a bit. We're looking for roughly 10 inches. So on these, we've got to pull in a little bit. This is one of those issues where if I can't do it myself, it's a two-man job. So and in some cases, like that one I just hit in, the truss was extra tight. And it kind of sucked the whole thing in a bit. Perfect. Now I'm not using sinker nails here. You can use 8s, 10s, or 12s. And the reason for that is we just want to hold it in place. We're going to be putting sheeting all across this roof, and that'll hold it in place better than any nail will. And I don't want to risk taking a nail that's too big, bringing it almost down to the bottom of the cord, and possibly splitting it. Now, what's happened here is this truss has gotten a little bit twisted, and luckily it's not real twisted, so what we do is we have to bring it in just a hair. So we measure off 10 inches from the front of the outrigger to where we want the truss to be, and then just make sure both sides line up. But typically, once you pull it back and nail it down or tack it down to where it needs to be, the other one's going to line up just as well, and all the rest are going to kind of come and follow suit. Okay, so we've got all of our outlookers or outriggers up and ready. They're all nailed in place. We're ready to put the barge rafters on. Once the barge rafters go on, then we'll put the fascia on. And at that point, we have a decision to make. Do we want to take the plywood all the way down to the fascia, or do something that's kind of nice and somewhat decorative underneath the eaves?
Home Improvement Camp. Have at it.